There was nothing special about the woman in row 5. She boarded last. Quietly. No rush, no fuss. Just a nondescript figure in an oversized gray sweatshirt, black jeans, and scuffed sneakers. Her hair was tied back loosely, more out of convenience than style. She carried no laptop, no designer bag, no hint of modern self-importance. Just a worn paperback novel and a half-empty water bottle. To the passengers around her, she was invisible. A nobody. Flight 219 from Washington, D.C. to San Francisco had boarded on time, with the usual blend of business travelers, vacationers, and tired parents juggling restless toddlers. The cabin buzzed with small talk, ringtones, safety announcements, and the rustle of seatbelts clicking into place. Sarah Lawson said nothing. She took her seat in row 5, window side, and stared silently at the tarmac. Her gaze lingered not on the city disappearing behind her, but on the ground crew, the luggage handlers, the refueling truck. The subtle hand signals exchanged between the crew near the cargo hatch. Something about it tugged at her memory. A motion. A gesture. She blinked and looked away. The man in the aisle seat beside her was on a conference call, earpiece in place. She heard him say something about Q3 reports and funding rounds. She didn't look at him. She barely moved, except to buckle in and set the paperback on her lap upside down, unread. The pilot came over the intercom. Routine greetings, cruising altitude, expected turbulence over Kansas. Polite chuckles from a few passengers. Sarah didn't smile. She studied the cadence of the voice, not the words. Then came the first delay. A mechanical issue, the flight attendant explained. Minor, she reassured everyone. We'll taxi in just a few more minutes. Passengers sighed. Phones reappeared. Podcasts resumed. Sarah narrowed her eyes and looked again at the crew. One attendant, a man in his 30s with perfect posture, was checking the overhead compartments twice. Another seemed to be reading from a checklist, but her pen never touched paper. Sarah's fingers tightened on the armrest. Something was off. These weren't just pre-flight rituals, they were layered, masked, routine actions, rehearsed, yes, but too rehearsed, too timed, and most people would never notice. That was the point. Her eyes shifted subtly to her right. A woman in row 4 leaned into the aisle and snapped a selfie with her boyfriend. Behind her, 2 men passed glances across the row. Nothing odd to an untrained eye. But Sarah's mind was already clocking facial tension, wrist posture, thumb patterns. Her training never really left her. She took a slow breath and looked down at the open paperback. She hadn't read it in weeks. She carried it because it made her look harmless. Boring, even. Another ding. The seatbelt sign switched off. And just then, the second delay was announced, an unusual systems check. Again, nothing to worry about, the flight attendant said, a bit too quickly. We'll be in the air shortly. Sarah turned her head. 2 rows back. Someone coughed once, then twice. A pattern. She froze. 3 months ago, she'd heard that same sequence in a parking lot in Virginia. Before the car bomb went off. Before she buried what remained of her handler. Before she disappeared for good. She looked at the man who'd coughed. He was already looking away. Instinct took over. She leaned forward, pressing her hand against the seat in front of her. Something metallic under the cushion. Not hers. The cabin crew hadn't noticed. Or maybe they had and weren't supposed to. Outside, the aircraft door was sealed. The engines started to hum. Sarah closed her eyes briefly. 6 years ago, she had been Echo November 5, a covert field operative embedded in extraction and counterintelligence missions overseas. Then came the Berlin Compromise, the burned cover, and the extraction that left 2 allies dead and her identity erased. They told her she was done. She believed it. Until now. Row 5's overhead light flickered once. Then again she didn't look up. Instead, she stood and walked calmly to the galley at the front. She didn't ask for water or peanuts. She looked directly at the flight attendant and said, "Hot tea, 3 sugars." "No lemon." The woman froze. Her face twitched, not confusion, not hesitation, but recognition. She handed over a napkin with the cup. Wordless. Sarah took both and walked slowly back to her seat. The plane was moving now, taxiing to the runway. She unfolded the napkin. Inside was a tiny note, written in tight, hurried handwriting. 14C suspect. Possible secondary. Weapon hidden. Cabin lockout initiated. You're cleared. She exhaled. The plane was lifting into the sky. And Sarah Lawson, the woman nobody noticed, was no longer a passenger. No longer forgotten. She had just been activated. The tea was lukewarm, but Sarah held the cup carefully in both hands as she returned to her seat. She didn't drink it. It was never about the tea. She slipped into row 5 again, her posture unchanged, casual, controlled. Her seatmate was still, absorbed in emails, oblivious. Outside the window, the runway had vanished into cloud. They were in the air now, 32,000 feet of silence between them and the ground. Altitude stable. Cabin lights dimmed. She unfolded the napkin in her lap as if wiping her mouth. 14C suspect. Possible secondary. Weapon hidden. Cabin lockout initiated. You're cleared. She read it once, burned it into memory, and crushed the napkin slowly into her cup. The words echoed louder than the engine roar. You're cleared. It was the final authorization, an order hidden in civilian language. She now had jurisdiction to act with full discretion, using any means necessary. But there would be no backup, no command center, no safe house to run to afterward. She was on her own. Row 14 was 9 rows behind her. She couldn't just walk up to him, not yet. If the suspect was watching the crew, he'd already seen the tea exchange. Even if he didn't understand the code, he'd noticed the pattern. Sarah had to approach indirectly. She pressed the flight attendant button and waited. The same woman appeared. Early 30s. Dark hair pulled back tightly. Her name tag read Jessie, but that could be false. "I spilled the tea," Sarah said simply, showing the empty cup. Jessie's eyes flicked to the crumpled napkin inside, then back to Sarah. "Let me get that for you." Her fingers barely brushed the cup. Inside that touch, there was another exchange, a tiny plastic tag passed from palm to palm. Sarah kept her face neutral. Once the attendant left, she palmed the tag under her leg and inspected it. It was a luggage claim stub. Untraceable, except to someone with airline access. Number was printed on it. UGS 418 AUNDER galley storage. Compartment 4. Locker 18A. Not overhead, not under a seat. Whoever planted the weapon or device had used a ground team before takeoff. Possibly disguised as maintenance. Either way, it meant this was coordinated. Internal help. Possibly more than just the suspect in 14C. Sarah's fingers itched for a firearm, but she hadn't carried one in nearly 2 years. She didn't even have a pocket knife. That was intentional. Dead identities didn't carry weapons. She stood, casually and stretched, pretending to work out the stiffness in her back. Her eyes scanned the passengers now. 14C was a white male, mid-40s, short hair. Business casual gray slacks, navy blazer, collared shirt. Nothing screamed terrorist, but trained eyes recognized ex-military posture. His hands stayed under the blanket on his lap. Too still, he wasn't sleeping. He was waiting. Sarah passed him once, slowly. Her gaze remained forward. Expression. Bored. As she moved toward the back of the plane, she noticed a second man, seated in 21D, giving her a side glance. Casual but rehearsed. A secondary dot she kept walking, near the restroom. She pretended to fumble in her bag, using the opportunity to study the floor panels. The galley hatch was hidden beneath a matte standard airline design, but the corner had been disturbed, slightly lifted. She crouched and adjusted her shoe, noting the serial number. It matched the claim tag, Locker 18A. She would need access. Quietly, without triggering attention, returning down the aisle, she counted rows in her mind. Her brain mapped positions like blueprints. 14C21D, possible network. Flight attendant Jesse's odd tension. Who else? The older man in 3A? A silent teen by the emergency exit? She took her seat again and closed her eyes, but not to rest. She was listening to clicks, murmurs, FOOTFALLS to the unnatural stillness of some passengers and the low murmur of crew voices behind the curtain. And the voice returned, this time from the cockpit. Ladies and gentlemen, we're expecting some turbulence as we pass over the Rockies. Please remain seated. And for crew, Echo November 5, prepare for weather. There it was again, her code name. Hidden in a throwaway phrase. Anyone else would hear weather warning. Sarah heard a command. The pilot had just told her something was coming. Be ready. She opened her eyes. Her seatmate was still typing. Row 14 stirred. Slightly. He adjusted something under the blanket. Sarah didn't move. She waited, counted 6 full seconds, then slowly reached into her seatback pocket. Inside was a motion sickness bag, but she wasn't sick. She opened it and pulled out a folded slip of laminated paper, pretending to study the in case of emergency instructions. Behind it was a razor-sharp ceramic strip fin, dull-colored, harmless-looking dot, not traceable by metal detectors. She had placed it there 2 months ago, during a just-in-case return flight. Today, she was grateful for the paranoia. Slipping it into her sleeve, she stood. Time to move. No more signals. No more waiting. Echo November 5 was in play, and the sky had just become a battlefield. The captain's voice still echoed in her head, calm, confident, and coded, Echo November 5, prepare for weather. It sounded routine to every passenger on board, but to Sarah, it was thunder. That phrase wasn't just alert. It was activation. And it meant this wasn't a one-man plot. The pilot was in trouble, or at least not in control. And he was trying to help without blowing his own cover. Sarah moved. She didn't sprint or panic. She simply stood like someone heading to the lavatory. But her brain was racing ahead. The ceramic strip was now tucked under her watchband, snug, hidden. She passed row 11. Then 12.14C stirred slightly. His head was tilted, eyes closed, but the rhythm of his breathing was off. Controlled, measured, faking sleep. His right hand twitched. Under the blanket again. Trigger finger, maybe? His briefcase hadn't been scanned. His bag had stayed with him during boarding. Suspicious, but not proof. She needed more. In row 16. A young boy dropped a toy car, and Sarah seized the moment. She bent to pick it up and used the angle to glance back directly at 14C's lap. There it was, a blinking green diode, barely the size of a thumbnail, nestled against something larger, matte black, boxy. That wasn't a phone. Or a laptop battery. That was a signal device. Possibly a detonator. Possibly worse. Sarah stood. No time for subtlety. She turned, placed one hand on the back of 13B's seat, and leaned slightly toward 14C. Sir, she said evenly, I'm going to need you to stand up. Now. 14C didn't move. Passengers around them shifted uncomfortably, sensing something was off. One woman glanced nervously at Sarah's tone. 14C opened his eyes. I'm sorry? he said, voice low, flat, dangerous. Sarah didn't blink. You heard me. His right hand twitched under the blanket. She moved instantly. Her left hand yanked the blanket. Her right jammed the ceramic strip down on his wrist. He shouted just once as she slammed his arm into the seat rest. Passengers screamed. The device tumbled to the floor, skidding beneath the aisle. A steward rushed toward them, hands raised. Sarah snapped, back off. 14C was struggling now, but she was already behind him, using a flexible zip tie from her pocket to loop around his wrists. She whispered directly in his ear, try to move again, and I'll put your shoulder out. Stopped. The passengers were fully panicked. No. Someone pulled out a phone. Others shouted. Sarah stood upright. Everyone stay calm. Remain in your seats. This man is being detained for your safety. But the look on her face said it wasn't over. Not yet. She kicked the black device down the aisle toward the galley, where a flight attendant caught it in a trembling hand. Do not press anything, Sarah said, pointing. The cabin fell into eerie silence. The man in 21D, the possible secondary, stood. Up. Too fast. Sarah turned just as he started down the aisle. His hand dipped into his coat. Sit down, she shouted. He kept moving. That's when Jesse, the flight attendant, stepped from behind the curtain, faster than anyone expected, and shoved a cart directly into the man's knees. He fell hard. A thud, a crunch of metal, a collective gasp. Sarah moved fast, stepping over the restrained 14C, reaching into the fallen man's coat. She found a plastic case the size of a deck of cards, already blinking red. Not a detonator. A transmitter. They weren't trying to blow up the plane. They were trying to take it over. Cabin lockout, she remembered. The note had warned her. Cockpit access disabled. Suddenly, her earpiece chirped. She hadn't used it in years. She'd left it buried in the lining of her jacket and encrypted. Microbud. Only a few frequencies could activate it. A voice crackled softly in her ear. Mail. Familiar. Echo November 5. This is Tower 3. Repeat, do you copy? She pressed the button hidden in her bracelet. Copy, she whispered, breath tight. Captain's locked out. Cockpit override failed. You have 11 minutes until they pass over Apex Grid. Interceptors are standing by. We need visual confirmation of the device. Sarah's pulse spiked. She looked toward the galley. Device is a jammer and signal rerouter. Not explosive. Likely sent from on board. Attempted cockpit hijack. I have 2 suspects in custody. Possible third pending. There was a pause. Copy that. Proceed with full clearance. You're the highest ranking asset on board. Repeat your command. She closed her eyes. Command. She hadn't heard that word in years. It wasn't just permission. It was burden. Total responsibility. Everyone on this plane now lived or died based on what she chose to do next. The co-pilot hadn't spoken since takeoff. The captain's code message was likely a cry for help. If the cockpit had been compromised, then whoever was behind this had an inside man. Maybe more than one. She turned to Jesse. Get me into the lower galley, locker 18A. Jesse blinked, nodded, and pulled out the keys clipped to her belt. Passengers were still reeling, whispering, panicking, filming. The man in row 4 looked like he might faint. Sarah didn't have time to calm them. She moved fast. Down the aisle, past the frozen faces, into the service corridor behind the rear galley. Jesse unlocked the metal floor panel and lifted it. Inside, a narrow hatch, unmarked, forgotten. Sarah dropped down into the dimly lit maintenance space below. The hum of the engines dulled here. She crawled on her elbows, following the narrow label, 18A. When she reached it, her hands shook just slightly. Inside the locker was a silver case. She opened it. What she saw made her blood run cold. A second jammer much larger, and a control pad already activated. A countdown blinked on the screen. 0 hours 10 minutes and 44 seconds. And underneath that, auto override in, active. The plane was flying itself. Sarah's fingers hovered over the keypad. 10 minutes and change. That's how long she had before full auto override took control of the aircraft's navigation system. After that, Flight 219 wouldn't belong to the pilot or anyone human. It would follow a pre-programmed route to its target. And based on what she saw next, that target wasn't San Francisco. She quickly scanned the override terminal. Coordinates had been input manually. She didn't recognize the sequence, but the direction was wrong, far too east. If her math was right, they were being steered toward a classified grid in Utah code named APEX. Apex wasn't just a military site. It was a nuclear material transfer hub. A no-fly zone. If an unidentified jetliner crossed that airspace. Automatic. Defense protocols. She shut the case. This wasn't terrorism for spectacle. It was a false flag trigger. Someone wanted Flight 219 to be destroyed on purpose by the U.S. Air Force. That way, no one could question it. The passengers would be martyrs. The attackers would remain shadows. Sarah's stomach tightened. She crawled back through the galley tunnel, emerging from the hatch with her clothes smudged, hair damp with sweat. Jessie was waiting, wide-eyed. "It's confirmed," Sarah whispered. "The override's real, and it's active." Jessie nodded shakily. "What now?" "Now, I need into the cockpit." Jessie hesitated. "It's sealed. From the inside. We've tried 3 times manual overrides, dead." "It's like someone welded it shut." Sarah turned sharply. "Who tried it?" "Me and Marcus." The co-pilot opened the door once 5 minutes after takeoff, said the captain was resting. But then it locked. "He hasn't come out since." "Where's Marcus now?" Jessie's face darkened. "Vanished during drink service." Sarah's eyes narrowed. "He's your inside man." The pieces clicked. Marcus, the tall, quiet attendant. New on staff. Joined last minute. Nobody questioned it. Typical for low-staff red eyes. But he never planned to serve drinks. He was here to seal the cockpit and protect the override device. He was still loose. Sarah moved fast down the aisle again, sweeping the rows. Passengers were whispering, scared, watching her now like she was both hero and threat. She ignored them. Back at row 14, she knelt by the restrained suspect. "Who's in the cockpit?" she asked, voice low and cold. The man smirked. "Wouldn't you like to know?" She drove her thumb into his pressure point. He gasped. "I'll ask once more." "Marcus," he choked. "Co-pilot's alive, but sedated. Captain's unconscious. Marcus has control. He was trained for this." Sarah stood. Trained. That meant ex-military. Probably private contractor. Maybe former intelligence. Marcus wouldn't hesitate. She ran to the cockpit door and knocked twice. And once filled rhythm. No answer. She pressed her bracelet mic. "This is Echo November 5. Tower 3, you copy?" A pause. Then, "Copy. Go ahead." Cockpit sealed. Co-pilot alive. Hostile operator inside. Override countdown active. 10 minutes to breach. Options? Negative on breach. Door is armored. Post 9/11 spec. Even? A rifle couldn't break it mid-air. Sarah's voice dropped to a growl. "Then give me something useful." A second pause. Then, "There's an emergency circuit relay beneath the main cabin fuse panel. It connects to the cockpit's manual failsafe. But it's not accessible during flight." Sarah thought hard. Unless she dropped the pressure. Simulate decompression. That would trigger an emergency unlock sequence. Risky, dangerous, but it might work. She turned to Jesse. I need to trigger a pressure shift. Just enough to fool the system. Where's the valve release? In the floor panel behind row 1, Jesse said. But you'll trip alarms. Good. Sarah made her way to first class, pried up the floor panel, and found the valve dusty, untouched, and wired with a safety cap. She yanked the cap and twisted. The cabin lights flickered. An automated voice announced, Pressure alert. System override in progress. Passengers screamed. Oxygen masks dropped. Confusion erupted. The cockpit door clicked. Sarah didn't wait. She bolted forward, ripped open the door, and burst inside. Scene stopped her cold. The captain slumped over in his seat, eyes swollen shut, bruising across his temple. The co-pilot sat restrained with a belt across his chest, dazed but conscious. And Marcus, tall, lean, eyes empty, stood over the controls, typing rapidly. He turned. Recognition flashed. You? He spat. They said you were out. Sarah raised her makeshift blade. I was, until now. He lunged. She ducked the first swing. His elbow caught the side panel. Sparks flew. He came again, this time faster, reaching for the circuit board beside her. She kicked it shut with her heel and drove her shoulder into his chest. They crashed into the captain's seat. Marcus grunted, tried to twist, but Sarah slammed the ceramic strip into his collarbone. He screamed. Too slow, she said. And she jabbed the strip into the side of his neck. He collapsed, twitching out cold. The co-pilot groaned. She knelt. You with me? He blinked. Knew someone would come. Sarah nodded. We've got 6 minutes. Let's take our plane back. The cockpit was chaos. Smoke trickled from a blown panel. The control interface blinked red across every surface. Marcus lay unconscious at Sarah's feet, twitching slightly from the ceramic shock strike. His weapon, a slimline sidearm tucked into his waistband, was now holstered at her hip. The co-pilot's breathing steadied, though his eyes fluttered with the fog of sedation. Name? She asked. Lieutenant Mark Voss, he muttered. Subbed in for the original foe. Called last night, said I had to report. Should have known something was off. Sarah quickly unstrapped him, helping him sit upright. You're good to fly? Voss nodded weakly. I'll manage. What's our altitude? 32,000. And falling. Auto navigation is rerouting us toward the apex zone. 5 minutes from grid entry. Voss cursed softly. If we hit that zone, they'll send interceptors. Sarah nodded. That's the plan. False flag. Shut up. They want this plane down by your hands. Voss's fingers shook as he reached for the control stick. Not happening. Not on my watch. She took the co-pilot's seat, strapping in beside him. What's our control situation? Partial lockout. Marcus jammed manual nav, but I've still got verticals and rudder. Power? Enough to redirect, not enough to climb fast. Sarah looked at the readings. Altitude drop had slowed, but the autopilot override was still ticking down 3 minutes now. Then she saw it, a small secondary touchscreen, half hidden beside Marcus's body, was counting down a second set of numbers. 0 hours, 2 minutes and 58 seconds. Below it, blinking in red, Relay 2. Ground link active. Her eyes widened. There's a second override. Remote uplink. Someone on the ground is ready to take full control. Voss looked grim. If they get control before we reroute we're cargo. Sarah drew Marcus's weapon and fired once, point blank into the relay console. Sparks exploded. The screen went dark. The remote countdown vanished. Voss didn't flinch. That'll wake the passengers. They're already awake, Sarah muttered. The cockpit door was still open behind them. She could hear cries, murmurs, questions. People trying to figure out who was flying the plane, and if they were going to die. She couldn't think about them. Not now. Sarah checked the radar. 2 military aircraft were trailing them, unseen but steadily closing. Tower 3, this is Echo November 5. Cockpit secured. Hostile neutralized. Second override disabled. Request urgent corridor clearance. For westbound reroute. The comms crackled. Echo November 5. You are cleared to reroute bearing 270. Execute sharp deviation now, or military response will be authorized. Sarah turned to Voss. We need full stick. Can you bypass the dampeners? He reached beneath the console and flipped a hidden switch. Bypass enabled. Sarah wrapped her hands around the control yoke. On 3, she said. 1, 2, 3. Together they pulled. The aircraft groaned as it shifted course sharply, veering away from its deadly path. Passengers screamed. Turbulence rattled. The cabin. Loose items flew, but the radar adjusted. The westward bearing locked. A new path, then the most beautiful sound Sarah had heard in hours radio silence, followed by Flight 219. This is Falcon 1. Interceptors disengaging. You are now outside restricted grid. Proceed to emergency diversion route. Godspeed. She exhaled, eyes closing briefly. It wasn't over, but the worst was avoided. Sarah turned to Voss. You good? He gave a weak nod. Where do we land? Nevada. Emergency strip. She leaned back slightly and looked at Marcus's slumped body. But something nagged at her. Too easy. Too linear. Sarah unstrapped and crouched beside Marcus again. She checked his jacket, his waistband, his boots. Then she found it a tiny microchip embedded in the heel of his shoe. She pried it out with the butt of the pistol and held it to the light. GPS. Relay. Tracking device. Someone on the ground wasn't just sending control. They were watching. In real time. Voss glanced over. More trouble. Yeah, Sarah said. But not here. She stood and exited the cockpit. As she stepped into the cabin, the atmosphere shifted. No longer terrified. Screams. Just eerie silence. Passengers were watching her. Every one of them. Mothers clutching babies. Elderly couples gripping each other's hands. Businessmen frozen with half-written emails on their screens. They saw the pistol on her hip. The smudges on her face. The bruises forming on her knuckles. One young girl, maybe 10, whispered, "Are we going to die?" Sarah stopped, looked across the cabin, and for the first time, she addressed them. "Not today," she said. Her voice was calm. Final. There was a pause. Then scattered applause. Weak at first. Then rising. Not celebration. Not relief. Just a human sound. The sound of hope breaking through fear. Jessie appeared behind her, eyes red but steady. Is it over? No, Sarah said, but the plane's safe. What about the people behind this? Sarah looked at the GPS chip again. They're not on board. Jessie frowned. Then who? Before she could finish, a dull thud echoed from the cargo bay below. Sarah's blood ran cold. She turned sharply toward the rear of the plane. There was someone else. The sound echoed again, a dull metallic thud, barely perceptible under the hum of the engines, but distinct. Intentional. Sarah turned toward the rear of the aircraft, eyes narrowing. Jessie stepped forward. Cargo hold? Sarah nodded, already. Walking briskly down the aisle. There's someone else on this plane. Jessie followed. A passenger? No, they'd have moved by now. Whoever's in that hold. They weren't meant to be found until it was too late. Passengers watched as Sarah moved with purpose, pistol drawn, eyes scanning every overhead compartment and exit door with soldier's awareness. Her steps were smooth but sharp, each one calculated. She stopped near the rear galley, eyes on the latch leading to the underbelly service stairwell. The panel was ajar by half an inch. Someone had been there. Recently. Sarah turned to Jessie. Seal off the aisle. Don't let anyone come back here. Jessie nodded and grabbed a service cart, dragging it across the corridor like a barricade. Sarah crouched low, placing her palm gently against the stairwell door. It was warm. Very warm. Another thud. This time closer. Then silence. She opened the hatch. Metal stairs spiraled into darkness. No cabin light reached down here. Just the muffled sound of flight and the low, pulsing hum of auxiliary power units beneath the fuselage. Sarah descended, pistol forward, one hand brushing the wall for balance. The cargo hold was cold. Unnaturally cold. Refrigerated containers lined the left side. Medical shipments likely. On the right, commercial freight and sealed suitcases. All tagged and numbered. All routine. Except one. Near the rear bulkhead, tucked behind two pallets, sat an unregistered crate, black, long, and unmarked. Not on the manifest. No tags. No security seal. And it was moving. Sarah approached slowly. The hairs on her neck stood up. Each step was deliberate. Her finger hovered over the trigger. Then a hiss. Hydraulic. Smooth. The lid cracked open from the inside. She stepped back fast, weapon raised. A figure emerged. Not bulky. Not threatening. A child. Thin, maybe 13 years old, shaking, eyes wide, and bound in a silver restraint harness that glowed faintly at the seams. No sound came from his lips, but he was mouthing something. Sarah quickly knelt and scanned the container. Wires, thermal regulators, biometric locks. This was a stasis pod, designed to transport humans without detection. Hey, she whispered. Gently. I'm here to help you. The boy's eyes locked on hers. He mouthed it again. She leaned closer, reading his lips. He's not alone. Sarah's stomach turned. She turned. Fast. Too late. A figure lunged from the shadows of the adjacent crater. Fast and silent. She ducked just in time as a blade slashed the air where her neck had been. Combat training kicked in. She swept. Low, catching his knee with her foot, and he staggered backward, but not down. He pivoted expertly and came again. This was no smuggler. This was a shadow asset. A Black Ops enforcer. Rare, lethal, disposable. They'd hidden him in the cargo bay to clean up after Marcus. And the boy? Likely never meant to survive. Sarah fired, but the man rolled, agile. The bullet sparked off metal. She closed the distance, using his momentum against him. Slammed his head against the stasis pod, twisted his wrist, and sent the blade clattering. But he didn't cry out. He smiled, blood in his teeth. I know who you are, he whispered. Sarah didn't answer. With one clean motion, she snapped his elbow and drove his skull into the crate behind him. He slunked. She caught her breath, scanned again. No more movement. No more threats. The boy was staring at her, terrified, confused, but alive. She knelt beside him. What's your name? His voice was raw. Ben. Do you know where they were taking you? He shook his head. I don't know. I woke up in a truck. Then this crate. I heard voices. A man said something about the handoff. And phase 2. Sarah's heart sank. This wasn't just about taking down a plane. It was a transfer. A delivery. A catalyst for something larger. She removed his restraints and helped him stand. He stumbled but managed. Sarah looked around. One last time, then led him up the stairwell. Back in the cabin, the tension hadn't lifted. People were whispering, wondering. Jessie met her eyes immediately, saw the blood on her jacket, and knew. What now? Jessie asked. Sarah looked at Ben. Now we land. Then we burn the entire trail they left. Ben grabbed her sleeve. They said. If you survived, they'd come for you next. She looked down at him. They already are. Jesse's eyes widened. You think there's another one? No, Sarah said grimly. There's another plane. The emergency landing strip in Nevada shimmered under the sun. Cracked pavement, rusted hangars, and a skeletal tower. It hadn't been used in over a decade. But today, it waited like a forgotten guardian. Sarah stood at the top of the air stairs, eyes scanning the distant hills. Not for rescue, for retaliation. She motioned for Jesse and Ben to stay close. We've got minutes before command arrives. Maybe less, Jesse frowned. Aren't they coming to help? Sarah looked at the sky. They're coming to contain. The passengers were being ushered off the plane by armed federal agents wearing unmarked gear. No flags, no insignias. Every question met with a stern, "Please proceed." Ben clung to Sarah's arm. They said, if the plane failed, they'd use the sister flight. Sarah crouched. Sister flight? Do you know where it's going? He shook his head. Just that it left after hours, smaller. But the man said, it has more than one passenger like me. Sarah's blood turned to ice. Clones, duplicates, biological blackmail, human cargo. If Flight 219 was the decoy, then this, sister flight, was the payload. Jesse tapped her tablet. There's one other private flight that left the same hangar an hour later, filed under a shell company in Belize, disguised as a donor flight organs for transplant. Destination, international waters. Sarah snapped her fingers. That's it. They're offshoring the lab, beyond jurisdiction. Jessie narrowed her eyes. How do we stop a plane that's already in the sky? Ben looked up. He said only you could stop it. Because of your name. Sarah froze. Jessie turned. What does that mean? Ben hesitated, then whispered. They said your real name isn't Sarah. Jessie blinked. Wait, what is your name? Sarah stood slowly. Calcine Iris 7. Born off book. Trained in silence. I wasn't supposed to exist. But when a PEX started Project Mirrorgate, I was embedded, deep, until I vanished. Jessie looked stunned. You were one of them? I was made by them. Then I broke loose. Ben whispered. They said you'd come back or be forced back. Sarah looked at the agents. They don't want to debrief me. They want to erase me. Just like Marcus. Just then, 3 men in black suits stepped out of an SUV. They didn't look like agents. Their posture was too still. Their eyes too flat. The lead one spoke into a mic. Target is on site. Proceed with fallback protocol. Sarah turned to Jessie. We're not staying. Where can we go? Jessie asked. Sarah's eyes locked on a forgotten hangar. That one. They ran. Jessie helped Ben keep pace. Behind them, the agents noticed murmurs into earpieces. Sudden movement. By the time Sarah kicked the hangar door open, orders were being shouted behind them. Inside, darkness, dust, and parked in the shadows, a prototype, twin-rotor craft from Sarah's old unit. Please tell me you know how to fly this, Jessie said. I trained the pilots, Sarah replied. As she climbed into the cockpit, gunfire rang out warning shots. The agents had drawn weapons. Ben ducked under the console. Jessie grabbed a headset. Main rotors online, Sarah said. Flipping switches. Power cells full. The engines whined to life. Dust flew. Men ran toward the hangar. Sarah locked the cockpit and grabbed the yoke. Hold tight. With a surge, the prototype lifted off, wobbling slightly, but rising fast. Bullets. Pinged off the hull. One cracked the side window. And they were airborne, soaring out over the desert. Jessie let out a breath. You just stole government tech. Sarah gave her a side glance. They stole children. We're even. Ben pointed at a blinking radar screen. That red dot? That's the sister plane. See? It's moving south. Fast. Jesse nodded. Altitude 28,000. Looks like they're heading for the Gulf Stream. Then we intercept over Arizona, Sarah said. Before they hit international airspace. She pushed the throttle. The aircraft roared forward, cutting the sky in a blur. On screen, a Z. Red dot grew closer. Jesse's voice went hard. If they find out we're following, they already know, Sarah said. Indeed, as they neared, the radar lit up again. 3 escorts. Black jets. Unmarked. These aren't commercial. Jesse whispered. Sarah cracked her knuckles. They're Apex's Ghost Squadron. They don't exist. They don't miss. Jesse turned pale. How do we survive them? Sarah smiled grimly. We don't fight them. She flipped a switch. A cloaking subroutine, powered up, experimental. Never tested. The aircraft shimmered on radar, then vanished. Sarah banked hard, approaching the sister plane from below. As they neared, Ben stared at the larger aircraft. His voice trembled. There are more kids like me in there. Jesse whispered, then let's bring them home. Sarah locked onto the cargo ramp. One shot. In and out. Ready? Jesse nodded. Ben squeezed her hand. Sarah dove. The real storm had begun. The air between the two aircraft was razor thin. Turbulence howled around the stolen prototype as Sarah brought it under the sister plane's belly. One wrong jolt and they'd collide. Jesse hung tight to the frame, eyes wide. That ramp door won't stay open long. Sarah gritted her teeth. We don't need long. Just enough. She flipped a manual override. Ben, get ready. When we're close enough, you'll crawl through and hit the lock release on their cargo ramp. You've seen it before. Can you do it? Ben's voice shook. Yes, I think I can. No thinking, Sarah snapped. You can. Now go. Ben climbed out through the side hatch. Wind whipped his face as he crawled along the narrow bridge Sarah had extended. Just 20 feet between both aircraft now. One wrong gust, one moment of hesitation, and he'd fall thousands of feet. Inside the sister plane, the clone children sat sedated in rows. An armed woman paced the aisle, checking straps. A man near the front sipped coffee casually, eyes on. A tablet tracking flight paths, encrypted messages, and profit margins. ETA to drop point? The woman asked. 11 minutes, the man replied. Final phase begins at 12:40. The world will never know what we carried. They didn't know that danger was already beneath them. Ben reached the undercarriage latch. His fingers fumbled, heart racing. Then click. The mechanism hissed. Suddenly, red lights strobed inside the cargo bay. The ramp yawned open. The wind screamed into the aircraft as Sarah's stealth craft locked position. Jesse fired a grapple line into the floor, anchoring the aircraft together. Let's go, Sarah shouted, vaulting across the makeshift bridge, landing inside the sister plane with surgical precision. Jesse followed, armed. Ben tumbled in after them, catching his breath. The woman guard spun, but Sarah was already moving. One swift blow dropped her. Jesse secured the aisle. The man at the front stood, stunned. Who the hell are you? Sarah held up a card. The old black sigil of the Iris Directive. The ghost you tried to bury. He paled. You're... She shot the tablet from his hand. Shut up. Hands on your head. They secured the plane fast. Jesse moved through the back, checking each child. Vitals are steady. They've been sedated, but not harmed. We have time. Sarah moved into the cockpit. The pilot was mid-transmission. Base, we've been compromised. Repeat? She struck him hard and fast, dragging him from the seat. Not today. Jesse climbed in beside her. What now? Sarah adjusted controls. We drop altitude, reroute over New Mexico, and land at Ghost Station 7. Jesse blinked. That place is real? It's where I vanished. The sister plane banked left, descending from 28,000 to 12,000 feet. The escort jets spun, confused. Their radars showed nothing. Sarah's cloaked aircraft now flying separately. Using false coordinates. Suddenly missiles launched. 3 heat seekers incoming. Jesse shouted. Sarah cursed. They're aiming for the wrong blip. They're targeting our stolen jet, not this one. They watched from above as Sarah's prototype on autopilot was struck mid-air and exploded in a brilliant fireball. Smoke filled the sky. Debris rained down. They think we're dead, Jesse whispered. Let's keep it that way, Sarah said. 15 minutes later, the sister plane touched down at a forgotten airfield surrounded by red mesas. It looked abandoned, but as the wheels screeched, hangar doors opened. Armed figures emerged, older agents, long retired, wearing obsolete agency uniforms. One stepped forward. An older man with a cane. You came back, Iris 7, Sarah nodded. With cargo. The man looked at the children as they were wheeled out. Project Mirrorgate wasn't shut down. It just moved underground. I know, Sarah said. Now, we shut it down for good. Ben walked up to her. What happens now? She knelt. You're safe. And we'll make sure no one uses kids like you ever again. Tears welled in his eyes. You came back for me. I never stopped watching, she whispered. As the children were taken to safety, Jesse approached with a tablet. There's a video feed you need to see. She played the clip. A senator stood before a podium, speaking to press. Flight 219 experienced a mechanical anomaly, but landed safely. Thanks to the brave actions of the crew. No mention of clones. No mention of Sarah. Back to silence. Jesse said. Sarah didn't blink. Good. They'll never see us coming. Later that night, as twilight painted the sky, Sarah stood alone at the edge of the airfield. The stars blinked overhead. Her past had come hunting. She'd hunted it back. Now, she wasn't a ghost anymore. She was a reckoning, and Iris 7 had only just begun.